to model this bottle, I'm going to break it up into its three main components. The first component is the bottle, and that's just this big molded smooth plastic container. The other components are the lid, which is this white plastic top, and also the nozzle is the third part. Let's start with the bottle, and to create this curvy shape I'm going to use a technology known as subpatching. What subpatching does is it lets us create a basic, say we're going to use a technique known as box modeling, like so. I'm going to drag out a box that sits around the bottle shape, like so. I'm going to use the numeric options for the oops, let's drag that down to the bottom of the bottle. Use the numeric options for the box tool, and I want to say 2 segments in X, okay, which basically splits it 2 polygons wide. Okay, I'm going to also say 2 segments in Z, which splits it 2 that way. Now the reason I do that is because I want to round the shape of the bottle, so it's sort of circular from the top down view. Let's close that. Let's push a return key to finish with the box tool. Okay, I'm going to select in this top viewport these corner points. Okay, I'm going to zoom into this. Use H for stretch. I'm going to go into the center with the stretch tool, and I'm going to drag the points in and drag the points down. Okay, the whole idea is I want to select these side ones, and I'm going to drag those in, and I'm going to take these ones. Now it's not perfectly round, it's got sort of an oval shape. I'm going to rough out. You can notice that the top view is not perfectly centered up. I'm not going to be too worried, as it's more like a rough guide. In fact, if you're really concerned about getting that top view lined up properly, what you could do is go D for display, and you could adjust the center X and Y. So you could like drag that up like so, and the second one is left and right. Okay, that just gives us, it sits up a bit better like that. Now if you want to make sure that this is the same next time you load Modeler up, or when you start again you want to be able to load these quickly, remember to do the old save or backdrops. I'm just going to overwrite that one. Yep, overwrite. Okay, looks a bit better. Okay, so what I've done is I've made a box 2 segments wide, 2 segments deep, and then I've just taken the edges and I've just rounded it, so it looks sort of a bit like a simple 8-sided cylinder. Now I'm going to lasso with the right click, make sure I'm in polygon selection mode down here. I'm going to select the top polygons here, and I'm going to use modify size. I'm going to click in the center here, and I'm going to size that in till it's about that big. Use the H for stretch. Okay, I'm going to go in the center of the front. I'm going to drag it in and sort of round it a bit so it's a bit less oval, because this is where the cap is. Okay, so I'm going to stretch it in 2 ways until I get it's sort of more of a round shape than an oval shape. This will define the top of my bottle. Now notice again that some of the details in our images here aren't perfectly aligned. I'm not going to be too worried, I'm not going to get too picky about this, simply for the fact that, to be honest, it's more of a guide to get things going and get things feeling like roughly about the right shape. Now what I need to do is I need to say, well, where do we get the major changes in shape along this bottle? I've got sort of like a tapering cone type shape going on now, so I can sort of see it comes out about here, and then in here it starts to go into here, and it comes out quite sharp here. So I'm going to use the knife tool, which can be found under multiply, knife, and I'm going to slice here, here, using the right click to repeat the knife tool, one here and one here. I now use the point selection mode, and I'll right click and lasso these points and use the stretch tool, H for stretch. Stretch these out, and then the side view, repeat the same process, stretch them out. Okay, should we center it up like so. I'm going to go down to the next one, going to lasso these points, H for stretch. Okay, it's sort of okay here. Here I'm just going to widen this a little with the stretch tool. In fact, I can probably move it up because it looks like it comes in a bit sharper here. T for move. That looks a bit better. Okay. I'm going to lasso all these points. H for stretch. I'm going to move those out to the side. That's alright for these ones. Let's unselect them by lassoing around them. H for stretch on these ones. And stretch these out here. Okay, so we've sort of roughed out a basic detergent bottle shape. That's looking not too bad. I'm going to take the bottom points. Okay, Shift A to zoom in those. I'm going to get H for stretch in here. I'm going to stretch these in just a little. Start tapering them in a bit more like the bottle. And taper them in a bit here too. Go and use the T to move. T changes to move tool, and I'm going to just move these up. And unselect those points. Okay, so we've used the technique called box modeling to rough out the detergent bottle shape. And as you can see, it sort of looks roughly like that detergent bottle. But as we know, that detergent bottle is quite smooth. So what we're going to do is we're going to convert these polygons into what we call sub-patch surfaces. And to do that, we go into the detail tab. Sorry, the construct tab. And we go down to convert and click subpatch, and that smooths, it uses the polygons as a rough guide to a smoother shape. Okay, so it goes and smooths over the top of everything here. Now you notice it doesn't quite match the background anymore, because what it does is it uses what we call an implicit surface. It says here's a rough shape, and we're going to use this as a sort of a holding cage, if you were, that within this I'm going to contain a smooth sort of shape flowing inside here. So it doesn't quite meet the edges because it's using the outside shape as a guide to building a smoother shape within it. So let's hit the tab key, which is a keyboard shortcut for subpatch, to turn that off. And let's just add a few more details in here because it's got a bit more of a curve to the shape. So if we can just detail it up a little more. We'll zoom into that. Okay, we can sort of see, especially in the top here, let's just expand that out with the stretch tool again. Like so. You can sort of see here we've got a bit of a curve, so I'm going to use the knife tool to cut here where the shape changes. Lasso those points, H for stretch, drag these in a little, and in this side view you can sort of see it goes in here too, so I'm going to H for stretch, drag them in that way as well. Okay, let's have a look down here. Sort of see it sort of curves in like this. So I use the knife tool again to cut maybe another strip about here. H for stretch, and I'm just going to add a little bit more detail to the shape here. I'm pretty happy with that. Let's just check this, make sure we'll use the H for stretch on these ones just to push them out a little. Okay, I'm just going to add a little bit more detail. Now at the bottom of the bottle what we saw, if you recall from those reference pictures. You can go back and have a look. The bottom of the bottle actually molds inwards, and that's sort of part of the way it's manufactured. You get that little notch in the middle where the injection molding sort of cuts off. I'm going to just I'm going to shift these, and I'm going to bevel these inwards and just give a nice sort of smooth inner molding in the base like the real bottle does. So to do that, I'm going to use the multiply tab, and I'm going to select multi-shift. Okay, I'm going to hold down the control key to constrain, and I'm going to click and drag to the left. So hold down the control, click and drag to the left. To just put a little bit of a lip here. I'm going to right click, which will make it a new multi-shift. I'm going to hold down control again and click and drag to the left. Let go of the mouse, click and drag up just to bring that in, like so. And then I'm going to turn off the multi-shift tool. Unselect those polys, just so I've got a nice smooth molding happening there. Hit the tab key again to subpatch this. Very nice. So we're getting something that's looking a lot more like a detergent bottle. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with that. Okay, now with it in subpatch mode, I can come in here and I can start to H for stretch, select points, and I'm starting to expand them out. So it'll push them out a little further than they were in polygon mode, because we are making what we call an implicit surface, say mathematically defined surface within these polygons. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through and I'm just going to stretch them a little further so the implicit surface, the smooth surface, looks nice and close to the background picture. We'll just zoom up, have a look at these ones again. H for stretch. It's looking pretty good. Drag this out. Go up. Okay, this is not looking too bad. I'll just stretch it on the side here. And stretch it a little out this way. Move up. Okay, we can see these need to be they're sort of okay this way on the side, but on the front or the back view here, just bring these out. Let's go up. Okay, it's this area here that needs to be pushed out a little further. You can sort of see that the implicit surface, or these curves, don't quite match the shape of the picture in the background. So use a stretch tool, push these out this way, push these out this way, and they sort of match up here quite nicely. Now you notice there's a bit more of a curve in here. Okay, so what I could probably do is maybe take these points, go T for moving, and move them upwards, and stretch them in just a little. It'll help curve this, because what happens with subpatching is the closer that points are to each other, the sharper the curves are. Now you notice that if I was to take these points and move them up really, really close, this curve here gets smaller and sharper. Okay, and that's what subpatching does. You notice here in the 3D view, in the perspective view, it's looking quite tight and quite sharp. If I move this up even closer, it becomes really, really, really sharp. Okay, and I don't want it super sharp because it is quite smooth and round, so I'm going to move this down. And just by adjusting the distance between points, I can change the sharpness of the curves, so I can help get this shape looking a bit better. And I'm pretty happy with that. Okay, and unselect the. Next, let's create the cap for the bottle. That's the white cap just below the nozzle. Now to do this, I'm going to go to a new layer, and I'm going to zoom in on these viewports and pan around until I get a fairly good view on the cap, this white area here. Now notice the quality of the picture isn't quite high enough to give us a nice defined view of what the cap actually looks like. So I'm going to go D for display options, and I'm going to click on backdrop. I'm going to knock the quality up to 512. In fact, what's 1024 give me? Nothing. 512 knocks it up, gives it a little bit more detail. and the same in this one, 512, to just get a bit more detail in these pictures, and click OK. Now we can sort of see that the caps are, well, it's circular, and it's also sort of round at the top here, and it's got these little outcrops like plastic molded grips in there. So we're going to have to create all these if we're going to create a nice realistic bottle, or cap I should say. So let's start. How we're going to model this? Should we model it with sub patches? Well, I don't think so, because it's got quite a lot of little details in here. Let's go through, let's use a standard modeling technique. Let's create it from a primitive. Let's go create. Let's select disk, which is a tool that lets us create like cylinders, because the lid, well, it is really a cylinder. I'm going to click in the center. Okay, not of the lid, because the lid's slightly off-centered, but I'm going to click on the center, the origin, the black lines. Again, use the information panel down the bottom of the toolbar to make sure the cursor's at 0 and 0. I'm going to click, and I'm going to drag out a disk that's close to the shape or the size of the cap. I'm going to use the numeric options for the disk tool. I'm going to give it a few more sides, like 32. And I'm going to make sure the radius should be something like about 60 millimeters all round, maybe 55 millimeters, because it's a little bit too big. Yeah, it's a little bit better. And I'm going to click in the back viewport. I'm just going to drag the top and the bottom of the cylinder to create a basic lid or basic cap, and push return. Now we notice that the top here is quite rounded, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to edges selection mode, and I'm going to right click and lasso the edges around the top here. I'm going to go to the multiply tab, and I'm going to use the rounder tool. Now I like to use the numeric options, so N for numeric for rounder. First thing we notice is, oh, that's gone a bit funny. That's because the inset distance for rounder is way too high. It's set to 93 millimeters. It should be quite small. So I'm going to click the mini slider next to inset distance. I'm going to drag this back. Okay, you notice that it's not quite rounding things. Okay, make sure project inset is turned on. And let's drag it back to let's see, it's going to be about 8 millimeters, I'd say. Looks about right. Make sure project inset is on. If it's not on, it sometimes doesn't curve nicely. Okay, and once we're happy with that, 4 rounding polygons should be enough. You don't want too many of these. For instance, you don't want a huge amount, because it's going to make lots and lots and lots of extra small polygons here. I'm going to leave it about 4. And I'm going to press the return key, turn off the rounder tool, and unselect all the edges. So now we've got a rounded top on our cap. What I also want to do is, nothing in reality ever has a 90-degree sharp edge. Okay, so to make sure that this bottle is as realistic as I can make it, I'm going to just also round the bottom here, but an extremely tiny amount. Now to do that, I'm not going to use the rounder tool. I'm going to use the edge bevel, which is sort of like a simpler version of rounder. It'll split the polygons once. Click edge bevel and it splits them once like that. Okay, I'm going to go N for numeric, and I'm going to set the move option to 1 millimeter, like so. So it's a very, very tiny little edge bevel. Okay, then I'm going to unselect the edges. Now the reason I do this is because what happens when light shines on something that has a sharp edge, usually we know it's real. Something that sells the fact that it feels real is the fact you'll pick up small amounts of highlights on edges, even when they look like they're really sharp. So having a tiny, tiny little edge bevel like this will actually help sell the illusion that that this is a bit more realistic than our standard bog standard CG object. Okay, I see that there are some moldings or molded hand grips that are in the cap here. You can sort of see it just in the picture here. There's a bit of a highlight on the edge of this one, and see it on the side here. Now I want to mold these into the cap itself. So before I do that, I need to make sure that I use the knife tool. I can see the top of them is about here. I'm going to knife across the cap like so. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all these polygons here. So I'm going to click polygon selection mode or Control H, and I'm just going to run the mouse over these to select all the polygons. Okay, so now these are ready to be extruded out as some kind of hand like molded grip. But to do that, I don't want like the entire row, because they are like separate little grippy parts. So I need to deselect one or two polygons around here. Now this is 32 sides, so we can break that into maybe 4, into groups of 4, groups of 3 perhaps, and every fourth one. Let's deselect one polygon and count 1, 2, 3. Every fourth polygon let's deselect 2, 3, 4. So 1, 2, 3, and then deselect 1. 1, 2, 3, 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 deselect 1. 1, 2, 3. So there we go. We've got a perfect set of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 little grips that we can mold out of this cap. So let's zoom back out. And let's create these little grips in the cap. And to do that, I'm going to use the multi-shift tool. And what I'm going to do with the multi-shift tool is I'm going to use the numeric options. Just a bit more precision in here, because I want very small amounts of movement in here. And I am going to start by just, well, let's see, insetting them a tiny bit, like so. In fact, we can probably inset it a bit smaller than that, like 0.5 of a millimeter maybe. And then I can either right click, or I can click on this button here, called Insert Shift. Does a new one. And let's drag the mouse up and just do a little bit of a shift amount, like so. Insert another shift. Okay, or right click, and then I'll say shift it out. Whoops, not 3 millimeters. Let's say 2 millimeters. Okay, now the difference between this tool and some of the other tools is that this tool, this is actually measurements from the starting point. This is not so much another 2 millimeters out. This is actually 2 millimeters from the starting position. So the multi-shift tool is a little bit different. And I'm going to make 1 millimeter here, so it goes in another 0.5 millimeter. Okay, just so it has a tiny little bevel on here. You sort of see it here. A little bit in, a little bit out, a little bit of tiny bevel there. Okay, that's got us some nice fine little molding sort of grips onto our cap there. Okay, so let's close this. Let's push the return key to finish the multi-shift and deselect the polygons. And there's our basic cap with this nice moldings in the around the top there. The only last thing we need to do now is just to surface the cap. So I'm going to go surface, call it D_cap. Let's give it a nice white color. We can click directly on the RGB values in here and just drag these right up. Won't make it so shiny, maybe 20%. Click OK. Now notice that we have some weird shading problems in here. Got these sort of strange, sort of shadowy things happening here. This is what we call surface smoothing errors, and it's caused by the fact that Lightwave is trying to, same in here, is trying to create a smooth shading across polygons that are too much of an angle to each other, so it gets a little confused. Here's fine, but here not so good because it's trying to smooth across these tiny little bevels and the straight lines and everything else. To correct this, we go Surface Editor, we go Decap, okay, so we're selecting the surface in the Surface Editor and Modeler, and we just knock that smooth threshold down. At the moment the smooth threshold is 89.5 degrees, which means any polygon that's connected at an angle less than 89.5 degrees, so even up to 89.0, almost 90 degrees, Lightwave will treat as though it should be smoothed over. So let's change it down to something like 35 degrees. Much better. It gets rid of all those smoothing errors. Still looks nice and smooth because these polygons are connected at 35 degrees or less, but it gets rid of all these real funky sort of problems that we had everywhere else. Okay. Now don't forget to save the object or save incremental if you want to make sure you get some backups, and we'll continue to the next step. Now the last section of the bottle that we need to model here is the nozzle section, and this nozzle section is just a little bit different than the other parts of the bottle because, as we saw in those reference images at the start, it's kind of like a mushroom cap. It comes up in here, and then it's got like these little fins that run around underneath the cap. So what we're going to do to create this is we're going to go to a new layer, and I can sort of see that this almost looks like it's centered up on the on that center line there. So I'm going to use this this view, the right view, as the view I'm going to draw up a profile or a side cut of the nozzle, and I'm going to use the Create pen tool. I can sort of see that the plastic is quite translucent, so I can sort of see the shadow in here. You see the nozzle sort of comes into about here, so I'm going to start by using the pen tool and clicking, say about here. So this is like the inside of the nozzle, and it sort of comes up. I'm going to click here, and I'm going to make another point and drag it to here, and I'm going to have a point here, here, here. Okay, do another point maybe about here, another one back in here, what about here. It goes up to about there, and then it comes down for the nozzle, and I'm going to click another one into the center here. Now it's got that little pin that goes up in the middle, so I'm going to generate that pin by clicking another one about here. Then I'm going to create another one here. Now notice that, like when we created primitives, we get those light blue control handles, or drag handles as we called them. When we're using the pen tool, we get this light blue line that runs through each point. When we have these mean we can click on them and we can adjust them if we need to. So I'm going to click and add a point about here. I'm going to make this sort of, I'm going to mold this in a similar fashion to what the real one may look like if we were to cut it in half. Okay, if you've got an old detergent bottle, you could probably cut it in half just to see what it looks like on the inside, see how it works. If you truly want to get photoreal with this thing. And I'm going to click about here to say this is what. Okay, now if I want to adjust anything, come in here and click a few of these points. If you go Shift A, we'll zoom into that. Okay, and come through. I'm just going to have a quick check. Let's say something like that. Something like that, like that. Looks like sort of a side profile of the nozzle. I'm pretty happy with that. Okay, what I'm also going to do is I'm actually going to move. Okay, so hold on a sec, don't push the wrong buttons on the keyboard. Caps lock, very dangerous. Okay, caps lock is dangerous for one thing. This button here, Q, or surface button, if you use the keyboard shortcut a lot, Q to name surfaces. If you have caps lock on, capital Q or shift Q happens to be the shortcut for quit, and it's very easy to accidentally have that happen and lose a lot of work. So take a bit of care when working with keyboard shortcuts. Don't hit the wrong buttons like I just did. Anyway, so we've got this done. Let's adjust a few things. Okay, looks alright to me. It's flat. It should be sort of round here, but we can fix this rounder, for instance. And this, we'll just move these in perhaps. Okay. I'm going to take these. Okay, I'm going to just line it up on the center line here as well. So I'm going to go V on the keyboard, which is for set value. And I'm going to say, well, here's the x-axis going across here. I'm going to say x-axis 0, which will just zero everything up on the center line here. Okay, to make sure that these points are centered on this axis, which is Z. We can tell by the little letter at the corner here. So go V again, say Z. Select the points, of course. If you don't select the points, it's going to squash everything. And go OK. That'll make sure that they're lined up perfectly on this black line. Okay, and what we're going to do is going to use a tool called Lathe. So under here we're going to go Multiply. And under Extend there's a tool called Lathe. So click on Lathe and activate the numeric options. Okay. And I'm going to say, well, let's make it 32 size like the cat. And let's push the return key to turn off the lathe. You notice that the polygons look a little funny. They look actually inside out. And that's because it depends which way you modeled the polygons or which way they were facing when we lathed it. So if the polygon was facing this way, and then we lathed it around this way, it would be fine. If the polygon was facing that way and we lathed it this way, it will be facing inside out. Easy to fix. Simply hit the F key. F is shortcut for flip, and it flips the polygons around the other way. Okay, that's not looking too bad. I'm pretty happy with that. Now, like I said, there were a few things here be quite nice, just around stuff, such as this could be a bit nice if it was round rather than sharp. So if I select a couple of points here and I use the select menu and go select loop, it'll actually select all the points for me. I can also do the same with edges. Edges are just a nicer way of selecting these edges around here. Selecting points this way is also going to give us the same result. And I'm going to activate the rounder tool and use the numeric options. Okay. Whoops, don't go too far. I'm just going to bring it up to 2 millimeters and turn off the rounder tool just to round that out. Okay, I can also do the same on here and go select loop, rounder, N for numeric, and I can spread these a little further as well, like that. Just helps me create, if I'm modeling this rather than using sub patches, helps me create a smoother result here. And push return to turn off the rounder tool and unselect those. If I want to, I could even try here, but I don't think it's really worth it because it's sort of rounded to here. It looks quite nice. So I'm pretty happy with that. Okay, if I'm really going to be picky, I could go through and add, I'll take these edges here. Okay, in fact, let's just take the outside to begin with and go select loop, and let's use the edge bevel tool, N for numeric, and let's say 1 millimeter. 1 millimeter is a bit too big, so 0.5 of a millimeter. So half a millimeter, just a tiny little edge bevel there. Turn the edge bevel tool off. Select the inner one. Whoops. Make sure you don't select these outer points. Select loop. Edge bevel again. And I'm just going to use that value. It looks small, looks about right for me. Turn off edge bevel. Just to add a tiny bit of extra detail in here. Okay. There's a disc and stuff in there. You can sort of see the little notch and everything. Now, the last thing we need to do is we need to generate these fins that sit in here. You can sort of see they're quite curved. So I'm going to go to a new layer. I'm going to put this one in the background so I've got a reference to work with. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the pen tool. Go create, pen tool, and I'm going to create one just inside here, and that goes up to about here, so it's just above the mushroom cap area. Goes up to here, and one that's about there. Okay, I'm going to make it quite rough, because again, like we just saw, we can use the rounder tool to curve this in, like so, and I'll push return. I'm going to go to polygon selection mode. Okay, you notice that it's sort of on the center here. I'm going to actually move it across a tiny bit, like about here. And then I'm going to use multiply extrude, which lets me take this polygon and then extrude, sort of like drag it out and create a solid shape out of it, like so. Let's make sure it sort of matches quite nicely. It looks pretty good. Doesn't matter if it cuts in a bit far, that's fine. Yeah, it's more of a worry if it is sort of if it floats above the surface, it looks a bit strange. Extrude lets us just fatten that out. Okay. Now that I've extruded that and I've made sure it's sort of around the line is down the center, I'm going to, let's get edge selection mode because we can do it this way. I'm going to select that one edge, and I'm going to, you guessed it, use the rounder tool on here. So rounder, numeric, that's pretty good, almost right, a little bit too far. So I'm going to drag this back. Something that looks a bit more like that, 5mm, I'm pretty happy with that. Okay, again, like all our plastic surfaces, I'm going to come in here, oops, point selection mode, I'm going to select this side first. I'm going to edge bevel that. Okay, just to give it a bit of a... Okay, edge bevel is not always the most accurate. You notice that because of these weird, funky things. If I edge bevel too far, it doesn't actually bevel it nicely. Get these sort of weird things happening. So I'm going to undo that. Use rounder instead. Numeric. Rounder always tends to do a pretty good job. And I'm going to say 1mm. In fact, I'm going to make it smaller, 0.5mm. I'm going to make it maybe 3 rounding polygons. Don't need too many polygons in here. Done. Turn off the rounder tool, select the other side. Okay. And just go rounder one more time. N for numeric. Return key, turn that off again. And we're finished. Okay, so there's the fin done. And almost ready. What I mean by almost ready? Well, there's not just one fin around the top of this cap. There's probably, let's say, good, I don't know, say about 12. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and I'm going to duplicate it radially or in a circle. To do that, under multiply, under duplicate, I'm going to use the array tool. And I'm going to say it's a radial array. Now the center is 0, 0, 0, which is the center of these black lines. That's why I've been modeling around the origin. Okay, axis is Y, so it's like a line straight up the center here, so it's going to go around the Y axis. And I'm going to say about 12 and go OK. And I'm done. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Perfect. Okay, now that that's done, I'm going to cut these away. So edit, cut, or Control X, go to my nozzle layer and go edit, paste. And there's my nozzle. Last thing I'm going to do, go Q, or click on the surface button and call this nozzle. Give it a lovely nozzly green color. That looks pretty good to me. Smoothing is on, click OK. And there's my nozzle, finished. Now if we put all three of these together, we have our photoreal detergent bottle. It's pretty close to our background images. We've used a variety of modeling techniques, and we're ready to do one last thing, and that's give it some textures. But before I do that, I'm just going to make sure everything looks like it joins together properly, because sometimes what happens is, well, as you can see here, the bottle sort of doesn't quite look like it's joining to the cap. So what I probably need to do is I'll put the cap in the background. I'll pick these 4 polygons up here, and I'm just going to, you can sort of see it molds in this way. I'm going to go T for move. I'm going to move these down a little. Okay, it's a little bit square, so what I might do is Control T and just move these corners in so they're a bit rounder. Move them in so this point lines up with them like that. And then what I might do is I might just use the Extender Plus tool, which will actually generate a new polygon like so. And then go T. It's going to create new geometry, sorry, not a new polygon. Move it up a little, and maybe use the stretch tools just to shrink it in a tiny amount, like so. Extender Plus to make another one. T for move, and I'm going to move it up so it makes something that looks like it's joining in to the cap, like so. Looks a little bit better. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. Well, if you want to be really picky, I could come in here and just use the size tool and size it up a bit so it meets the edges of the cap a little bit better. And I'm pretty happy with that. It's looking pretty good for this project anyway. Okay, at this point I'm going to go File, Save Incremental, and I'm ready to carry on to the next step. For this bottle we need a label to just finish up the look of it. So we're obviously going to have to select, switch to texture wire up here, where this label is going to sit. Now one side of the bottle will have the label on. Okay, if we're going to get really photoreal, we'd also have a label on the back, but for now, to keep this project simple, I'm going to make a label on the front only. So I select the polygons where the label is going to be pasted. Okay, something like this, as you can see. And I'm going to go surface, and I'm going to call D label. Give it a different color so it stands out, and go OK. Now I want to snapshot this so I can take it into programs such as Photoshop to paint a label for it. So I'm going to press the equals key on the keyboard, or if you want to know where this is, under View, Hide Unselected, and that will just hide away those other polygons. Now it hasn't deleted them, it's just hidden them so that we're left with just this one selected surface. I'm going to maximize this back view by clicking on the button here, and I'm going to go Shift A to zoom in to get as much in screen as possible. Now what we need to capture, these polygons, but we actually need to capture them right to where these dots exist, because this is where, if we hit the tab key, the real polygons are. Okay, this is the unsubpatched polygons. This is, excuse me, the size of the polygons or the image that we need to generate. And when we tab, this is the actual physical area where they're going to appear. So it's going to be an image this big with a label that fits within this area. So I'm going to leave it subpatched, and I'm going to use like some sort of a screen capture tool. On the Apple, it's Apple Shift, and you can go 3, which will grab it and dump it on the desktop. On a PC, it's the print screen key. Okay, or if you have a image capture program, for instance, I'm using this program called Irfan View. Under Options, there's a Capture Screenshot button. and I'm going to say OK, and go Control F11, which will actually grab the screen for me. Now I'm going to File, Save As, and OK, I'm going to make sure that, where's my content directory, under my detergent project, images. I'm going to make a new folder in here called label. I'm going to call this detergent label. Okay, and I'm ready to paint up a detergent label in Photoshop. Now I'm going to zoom out of this. I'm going to unhide everything, which is unhide, or the backslash key. And I'm going to make sure I go File, Save, Incremental, and save the detergent bottle, ready for the next stage, which is going to be the texturing. I'm getting ready to create the label for the bottle now, and I'm going to do it in this very old copy of Photoshop that I have running here. Now what I need to do first is I need to crop the screenshot that I took from Modeler down to the right size. Now in this version of Photoshop there is no crop tool, so I'm going to use the selection marquee to select around the image, now out to where the dots are. Okay, so the top of the dots there, to the width of the dots there, and I'm going to go and crop that. This gives me the exact size that my image needs to be for Lightwave to fit it onto the bottle. Okay, the polygons here define the area in which the label will appear. Okay, so I'm going to make it a new layer, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make something really simple for now. Ideally, if you're doing this as a commercial job, the client would probably provide you with the marketing graphics and everything else that you'd need to detail up their detergent bottle. Okay, the other thing you could do, of course, is if you're not very good at designing labels, such as me, which, surprise surprise, I'm no graphic designer, is to actually go and source a real one and maybe even modify it in Photoshop, because there are certain things about design and layout of labels that make something look commercial, or look like it's a professional label. You notice that it's got things such as how much is in the bottle, information, codes on there, little catchphrases, a flavor, sort of a banner, some nice graphics, and a little bit of advertising. Now 25% or better on tough grease. Instead, I'm just going to go and make a quick and dirty label. Okay, going to make an oval shape. Oval's always nice, rather than a square label. Something like that. Okay. Now that we've finished modeling the bottle, we've finished the cap, the nozzle, we've gone through and we've actually painted up a label for the bottle. Before we can put all this together to make our final photorealistic looking detergent bottle, I just want to do a couple of things. The first thing is I want to combine these three separate layers that the object's built from: bottle, cap, and nozzle. I'm not planning to actually remove or animate each of these separately, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all three layers by shift and clicking on the top of each of these layers to select them all. I'm going to take those, I'm going to compress them down to a single layer, so I've got a one layer, one object that I can move around. It's all combined. To do that, I go to the View tab, and under Layers, go down the bottom here, I'm going to select Flatten Layers, which will take those three layers and turn them into a single layer. Okay, so it's now no longer made out of three layers, it's made out of a single layer. The other thing I'm going to do in here is I'm going to actually scale the whole bottle to more of a real world size. At the moment it's a little bit big. If you look at the bottom of the toolbar, you'll notice that it says grid 100 millimeters. What that means is every single square in this grid is 100 millimeters by 100 millimeters, or 10 centimeters. And there's about 10 tall. That's 10 times 10, it's 100 centimeters, about 1 meter tall. That's a pretty big detergent bottle. A detergent bottle is roughly about 26 centimeters, so it's quite small. To do this, I'm going to go to the Modify tab, and under Transform, More, I'm going to select Absolute Size. Now the absolute size tool, basically let's just type in a measurement, say I want it so tall, and it'll resize the whole object to fit within that size. Now to do this we need to change values to locked. And what locked does is it keeps everything proportional, so we change one value, the other two will update to retain the size and the scale of the object. If we have independent, we can stretch it in all kinds of different directions, so we can end up with this really funky, squished, stretched, crazy looking detergent bottle. So leave it unlocked. Reference, okay, bounding box, which basically builds a box around the entire object and then resizes that box. Okay, and I'm going to leave all these settings as is and simply type into the Y size 26 cm for centimeters and hit the tab key just to enter that, and then click OK. And there it is, all sized and ready to go. So all I do now is go File, Save, Incremental. Now that I've finished modeling the bottle, I've even created a label for it, let's finish off the bottle by making it appear more realistic, by changing its surfaces, giving it some real worldly sort of effects such as transparency and reflection and so forth. I'm going to use Layout for this because, as we know, Layout has a tool called Viper, and that's a really good little preview tool that lets us see real-time updates on surface changes as we work with them. So I'm going to enable the Viper tool by clicking on the Utilities Viper or pressing the F7 key. I'm going to change to a camera view. I'm going to move the bottle nice and close to the camera like so, and make sure I create a keyframe to lock it in place. Okay, now Viper is just a smart picture, so Viper is going to need a picture once we've activated it. At the moment it's got no picture in here. To create the picture we simply go render frame or press the F9 key. There we go, there's our picture generated. When we do this, Viper goes, okay, you've just rendered a frame, I'm going to grab that frame and keep it inside my memory here so that I can use it to update and turn it into a smart picture. Now you notice that we can't see it yet. That's because, as I've said it previously, Viper is what we call a context sensitive tool. What that means is it sees things based on whatever tool you've got selected. At the moment I've got Surface Editor selected, and it says up here Viper Surfaces. Now the first thing I want to do is I want to make this bottle, which is the D_bottle surface, 100% transparent, because it is after all see-through. Let's crank. So we crank up transparency to 100% for D bottle, and you notice the first thing that happens is that it becomes completely see-through. But at the same time, when it's see-through, what do we see? Well, we see the black background, which is going to make it a little bit tricky to see the effects of things like refraction and reflection on our transparent bottle. What would be very nice is if we had some kind of like a virtual environment in here, something we could see through the bottle to help us sort of see the effects of transparency. To do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a virtual environment. And what I've done is I've actually copied the image from the reflection image, sunset reflection from our UFO project, into the images folder of my detergent bottle. I'm going to go into the image editor and go load, and I'm going to load sunset reflection.jpg. And we use this like a virtual environment that wraps around my 3D scene here, or wraps around the ball, so it gives me some sort of a background to work with, other than black, obviously. Now once it's loaded, I go to the Windows menu, and I select Backdrop Options. Keyboard shortcut for that's Control F5. And I want to add an environment. An environment is basically like a massive infinite ball that encompasses the entire scene in Lightwave. And the beauty of this is that it provides like an environment for reflections and everything else to see. So if you don't want to model the sky and model a giant city and model a forest and model a sunset, you can use a giant picture instead mapped on this gigantic infinite ball that wraps around the scene. Now to add the image to the background as an environment, I go to the Add Environment drop down and select this thing called Textured Environment. Let's double click on that, and let's click on Texture. Now notice that as soon as I've activated Texture Environment, Viper's actually changed. My transparent bottle no longer looks transparent for a start, and it says in the title bar here, Viper textured environment, because Viper's now previewing anything I do to the texture environment here. If I click layer type and I'll change it to something like a procedural texture, it's now just updating the background. It's not actually updating the actual object itself. In fact, if we don't want that there, if we just want to see the background, we can tick this option, use ZBuffer, which will basically hide any 3D objects that we've got in the Viper preview. Okay, you can leave it on if you want to see it, turn it off if we don't want to see it. Let's leave it off for now. You notice as soon as I've said layer type procedural texture, it's gone and painted this turbulence texture inside this giant ball that encompasses my entire scene. Let's switch this back to image map, because I'm going to use the image map layer type, and I want to use a spherical projection, i.e. I want to wrap it around a ball. Under image I'm going to select sunset reflection, and I'll make sure the texture axis is Y, which is like a straight up and down in the center there, so it wraps around the correct way. There we go. Notice this line here. What we're actually looking at is the seam at the back where the two edges of the picture meet. What I want to do is I want to rotate it around so I get a fairly nice view of something that sits behind my bottle while I'm working. So I'm going to click on the rotation tab down here for the texture editor. I'm going to change the heading, so I'm going to click on the mini slider and drag. And as I do that, Viper gives me a real-time preview of the adjustments I make. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. Just something that looks a bit more interesting, shows me a bit of a background here. This cloud pattern, bit of sky, quite nice. Okay, I could keep going around if I want to. Again, you can also come in here and adjust things such as the position, if you want to move the whole picture up and down. Let's move it up on Y. Sort of sliding it up and down inside my environment. And we can drag that around to, I can view the harbour bridge in the centre there. Can move it up and down as well. Make it 0, 0, 0 if you want to make sure that the texture is centered nicely inside this ball. Okay, so I'll move this back. I like that, that's quite nice. It gives me something a bit more interesting than black. Once I'm done with that, let's close texture environment. Let's close the effects window here, so we don't need this anymore. And let's go back to our bottle. Okay, you notice that the bottle is no longer in here. Okay, you probably think, oh crap, that's not looking too good. Let's go back to our mouse, so we don't have a okay, need to change this. Sometimes it doesn't update properly. Okay, let's dump the transparency back down. There, that's better. There we go. Okay, so you notice that it's now transparent, but we can sort of see something through it, a bit more interesting than the black that we had before. Let's start by surfacing the bottle. Now the bottle is a transparent surface with a fluid inside, and you notice that we have transparency at 100%. However, we're sort of seeing nothing. It's become like the invisible man, completely see-through. Can't even see the edges of the bottle. We can see a few little highlights here caused by the specularity, but not much else. And the reason for this is because transparent surfaces often tend to refract light passing through them. Depending on what they're filled with, whether they're filled with a liquid or they're made out of a thick glass, every transparent surface tends to refract at least something, or a little. Refraction of 1 means no refraction, i.e. it doesn't distort any light coming through it. So let's change the refraction index to 1.333, which is pretty good for liquids, and there you have something that behaves a little more like we'd expect. We're getting this quite nice sort of refracted distortion, and we're starting to see the shape of the bottle, and we haven't had to knock the transparency back down at all. One of the other things that happens when you make something 100% transparent is we also tend to make the color disappear. Okay, and now it's like completely see-through, which is great if this bottle happens to be filled with water, but we want to keep that nice green color because that was the color of the detergent inside the bottle. How do we do that? Well, we need to tell the surface to actually filter the light passing through it. at the moment light is just going straight through it. It's getting refracted and it's not doing anything to the light other than just distorting it slightly. So under advanced, we need to activate this option here, color filter. What color filter does is change it to 100%. Is it uses the surface color and says take the light passing through and filter it based on the color of the surface. So it becomes like a color lens that light passes through. This option is really good if you're making things like stained glass windows, or in this case a colored bottle, or a bottle with a colored fluid inside. Now one of the other things that transparent surfaces tend to exhibit, one of the other types of attributes, is they tend to show what we call the Fresnel effect, and that is as the surface becomes more edge on to your eye, it becomes less transparent, and reflections and highlights tend to increase. To do that, we simply add under shaders a shader called Fast Fresnel. Okay, and there you have it. It's picking up the reflections and highlights on the edge. Okay, it's become quite non-transparent around the edges, but still quite transparent when we look straight onto the surface here. See it more in the sphere here. It's probably a better example. Let's go back to basic. Now you notice that the edges are becoming quite bright. That's because as it becomes less transparent, the solid surface tends to get lit by the lighting around the environment. I'm going to tone the diffuse back to lower the amount of effect the light has on the bottle. So I'm going to change it back to maybe 30%. That feels a lot better. Okay. Now you could also knock the glossiness back a little, maybe 30%, to broaden those highlights, because the plastic doesn't tend to be overly polished. It tends to be covered in small scratches and funny little molding artifacts and so forth. So a little less glossiness sort of helps make these highlights a little bit better. Okay, so we're finished with the bottle. Now we need to duplicate this onto the label surface, because the label surface should be the same kind of plastic, except we're going to put a picture on top. But we want the plastic around the label to look the same, so we don't have like a big square like this. Let's go to the surface editor and right click on dBottle and go copy. Let's go to the label surface. Let's right click and go paste. Okay, so we've got the label surface ready to go. We copied the bottle surface across to the label so that we could have this nice seamless bottle. So we wouldn't see the edges around the polygons as we change from one surface to another. Now what we need of course here is the label texture itself. So you may be tempted to go to color and click on the T and go load image. Load the detergent label graphic, which is the one we created in Photoshop. Make sure the axis is set to Z and click the auto size. And there it is. You're thinking, wow, finished, easy. Except for the fact that this surface is still transparent like the bottle. You can sort of see that all it's doing is filtering the light passing through the transparent surface, so you see the color. Now this is not too bad if you want one of those like clear plastic, perhaps a clear plastic label, but for this bottle I want one of those cardboard or paper type labels which isn't transparent. So let's remove this texture for now, and let's go to the edit nodes to bring up the node editor. Under add node, let's add a 2D textures node, image. This is how we use images in the node editor. Double click on image and select the detergent label graphic. Okay, we need to make sure we have axis set to Z, mapping is planar, and click auto size just to size it to these polygons or the size of the surface. Can't see it yet because we haven't connected it. So under color, let's connect it. Okay, so it's on there. However, you notice that it's actually black around the edges, and the reason for this is if you look in the image node, we have a background color, and this is a color that it paints the alpha channeled label on top of. To match the bottle, we need to change the background color to the same color as the bottle. What I've done is I've actually stored the bottle color as a custom color in my color picker here. Okay, here it is, 85 red, 170 green. I'm going to apply this as my background color, and that'll just fix this whole issue here. And we can close that. Okay, so I've got my label in place, however it's still transparent. What I want to do is I want to make it solid, so I don't want it see-through. So I can click on alpha output to read the alpha channel, and I can say, okay, let's plug this into the transparency channel. Okay, it's sort of there. You notice it's made the edges solid and the label is still transparent. That's because alpha channel is white where the label is. That is the same as essentially 100%. So if we could take this alpha channel and we could invert it so that the outside here was 100% and the inside was 0, then it should work. To do that, we're going to have to alter the alpha channel or process it through another node and then feed it into transparency. So let's go to the add node, drop down again. Let's get to the math nodes. Math nodes are little mathematical functions that can plug information into, calculate something new, and send out a new value. Now percentages tend to be scalar values. These are values that can be something with a decimal place, essentially. So 0.0 to 0.05 and so forth. Under here we have a whole pile of new nodes, ABS, add, box step. What we're looking for is this one here, invert. So let's add an invert node. So click again on the output of alpha from this image and plug it to the input of the invert node. This should flip it inside out, so the label becomes 0% transparent, the outside becomes 100%. Let's click on the output of the invert node and say it'll give us this new inverted alpha channel and plug it into transparency. And there it is. So it's now no longer transparent. However, it is quite dark. And the reason for that is because the diffuse setting for the bottle was set quite low. So it's saying don't give back much color for the label. So we're going to need to adjust that diffuse setting so that it makes it a lot brighter. In fact, it'd be nice if this was like 100%. So we could connect the alpha channel, which is 100% where the label is, directly to the diffuse channel. And there it is. Now, one thing that's not quite going to work here is the fact that the outside of here will probably be 0%. At the moment you can't notice it because there's no lighting on this section. However, if we were to turn the bottle slightly, you'd notice that there might be a slight shading difference between the area around the label. One thing we could do is we could remap the diffuse values so that it was changed to 30% here and 100% here. Or let's minimize this. Let's go back to debottle and just simply change diffuse down to 0 because we don't really need too much lighting effect on the bottle, and that still looks quite nice. And it's a quick fix that will save us a lot of working around and mucking around in the node editor to set up. Okay, so the diffuse is set, the transparency is fixed, so the label's looking a lot better. The last thing I want to do is I want to remove the specularity from the label. I don't want it shiny like the plastic, I want it quite flat. To do that, I simply need to adjust the specular setting so that the outside retains its 50%, which is the default that we're using, and the inside is 0%. To do that, I need to remap the alpha channel because the alpha channel obviously is a black and white image. Let's add another node. In fact, let's add a gradient node for this. Gradient. And let's plug the alpha channel output into the input of the gradient. So we're feeding the values from the alpha channel into the gradient. Let's double click on gradient, and what we can do in here is we can say, based on whatever value is in the alpha channel, let's create a new value that we can use to control the specularity. I'm going to click in here and add another key. Okay, this is key 2. I'm going to change the position to 1.0, which is the same as 100%. So this is saying where the alpha channel input is 100%, I'm going to use whatever these values are, color, alpha, and so forth. I'm going to be using the alpha channel here because it lets me set a percentage. So where it's 100%, i.e. where the label is, I'm going to say 0. I don't want any specularity there. Now, what alpha actually does is it controls the transparency of the color of this key over the top of this background color. Now I'm not going to be using the color from this gradient at all, so I don't care too much about what I'm doing with the alpha channel. It's just easier to set the alpha value in here if we're driving an input that requires a percentage. I'm I'm going to click on the top key. This is where the outside, or the 0% of the alpha is. Okay, I want this to retain that 50% value that is set already for the surface, for the bottle surface. Okay, so it's reading the alpha channel. It's saying, okay, when it's 0 or black, i.e. where the transparent areas are, I'm going to say 50%, and down here where it's 100% or solid, where the actual label is, I'm going to be saying 0%. So I've remapped these values. I'm going to take them, I'm going to click on alpha, which is the percentages, and I'm going to plug that alpha output from the gradient into the specular. You notice in here instantly the label graphics become unshiny or unspecular. And we're done. So that's set up our sparkles label ready to go on our bottle. For the rest of the bottle, I want to change the cap surface, which would be a white plastic, and the nozzle surface, which would be a green semi-translucent plastic. These will be fairly straightforward. To do this, let's just close Surface Editor temporarily. Let's adjust the bottle and let's move it closer to the camera so we can see the surface we want to work on a lot better, like so forth. Okay, because Viper at the moment is, like I said, it's a smart picture. It's only seeing the bottle. I'm going to go render frame to take a snapshot of that, and there you go. If we click render on Viper, there's our update. Let's bring up the Surface Editor again. Okay, nice thing about Viper is you can actually click on pixels within the picture, and when you've got the Surface Editor open, it'll actually choose the surface in the list there for you. It's quite handy when you've got objects with vast amounts of surfaces and you're not quite sure, well, what was that called again, because you've got like so many in here to choose from. You can just click in Viper and pick the pixel on the picture, say what surface was this, and it'll pick it for you. Now the cap, I'm not going to do too much with. I'm going to knock the diffuse back a little to maybe 90%. Okay, I'm going to make the specularity a little higher because plastic is quite shiny, 30%, and knock the glossiness down to maybe 30% to make the shininess a bit broader. In fact, we can maybe 25% on that. Okay, make it a little bit more plasticky. Reflection, not too much. It'd be a little bit reflective. I'm going to say maybe about 5%. Just give a tiny bit of reflection in there. Okay, that's pretty much all I'm going to do for the cap. You can do a lot more to the cap if you want to, but for this I'm quite happy with it. For nozzle, okay, I'm going to do a very similar thing. I'm going to make this at 90%. Diffuse. Specularity about 50. And glossiness about 30. Okay. I'm going to come in here and give it about 3% reflection, just a tiny bit of reflection. No transparency, however under translucency, this is the amount of light that can come through from behind the surface. So I'm going to say translucency 25%. Well, in fact I'm going to make it like 75%. And this is the amount of light that can come in from behind the object. And you can sort of see it here in the preview sphere on the bottom. It'll just give the nozzle a little bit of a translucent, semi sort of see-through effect. Translucency in a way is like transparency, except for light. It says how much light can come through from behind. Okay, transparency is how much can you see through it. Transparency is not the same as translucency, but they are very similar in the way they work. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. So to say, well, I've finished the bottle. Let's go File. Let's go Save, Object, Increment. And just save this to disk, all textured and ready to go.